The last grimy plate was washed, the final sticky countertop wiped clean, and the only sound in the Midnight Spoon diner was the weary hum of the old refrigerator. For Maya, this was the sacred hour, the time between the world's last demand and the pull of her lumpy mattress. Outside, a relentless city rain slicked the streets of New York, blurring the neon lights into watercolors. It was in this quiet solitude, with a damp rag in her hand and the scent of bleach in the air, that she let it escape, a low, smoky hum that blossomed into the opening notes of an old jazz standard. She didn't know that just beyond the rain-streaked glass, a man stood frozen on the sidewalk, a figure cloaked in a coat worth more than her entire year's rent. He had been walking aimlessly, a ghost in his own life, but this voice, this impossible, velvet voice cutting through the gloom, had stopped him dead. It wasn't just a pretty tune, it was raw, it was real. It was a sound he thought had vanished from the world forever. He was Julian Vance, a music mogul so reclusive he was practically a myth, and he hadn't felt the spark of discovery in over a decade. He didn't know he was about to break his own rules, and she didn't know her life was about to be irrevocably changed by a song she sang only for herself. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The song was Gloomy Sunday, but not the tragic, overwrought version most knew. Maya sang it the way her grandmother Ilara used to, with a thread of resilient melancholy, a story of sorrow, yes, but also of the quiet strength it takes to endure it. Her voice wrapped around the worn red vinyl of the booths, caressed the checkered linoleum floor, and filled the empty space where laughter and clatter had resided just hours before. Each note was a memory, a phantom scent of her grandmother's lavender perfume, the feel of wrinkled sheet music beneath her small fingers as a child. Singing wasn't a performance for Maya. It was a release, an act of breathing out all the accumulated exhaustion, the unpaid bills, the quiet loneliness of a life lived on the margins of a dream. She moved through her closing routine with an unconscious grace, her body a metronome for the melody. She flipped the chairs and set them upside down on the tables, her movements fluid and practiced. The rag in her hand swept in circles, polishing the chrome napkin dispensers until they gleamed, the rhythm of her wiping arm perfectly in sync with the song's sorrowful waltz. Her eyes were half closed, lost in the world the music created, a world far from the lingering smell of fried onions and stale coffee. She was on a dimly lit stage, a single spotlight warming her face, a silent, adoring audience hanging on every syllable. It was a foolish, childish fantasy, one she hadn't allowed herself to indulge in years. But here, alone at 1 a.m., it felt safe. It felt real. Outside, Julian Vance remained motionless, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He had long ago become numb to the city, to its noise, its people, its desperate energy. He lived in a penthouse that was more fortress than home, insulated from the world by wealth and a grief so profound it had calcified around his heart. 10 years ago, the centerpiece of his label, the voice of a generation, and the woman he loved, Cassandra Vale, had been lost in a sudden, senseless accident. With her, the music had died. He'd kept the company running, a well-oiled machine managed by competent executives, but his own creative soul had shuddered. He hadn't set foot in a recording studio, hadn't listened to a demo, hadn't felt that electric jolt of discovering new talent since the day she was gone. He was a king in self-imposed exile, ruling over a silent kingdom. Tonight, his insomnia had been a particularly cruel beast, chasing him from his sterile apartment and out into the storm. He walked without direction, hoping the physical discomfort might distract from the internal void. He'd passed a dozen bars with live music, ignoring the blare of generic pop and rock. But this was different. This wasn't a performance. It was a confession. The voice was technically imperfect, a little raw, a little breathless, but it possessed something no amount of training could bestow, a quality he called soul truth. It was the sound of the human heart telling its story without affectation. It was the quality he had heard in Cassandra, the very thing that had made him fall in love with her and her music. He felt a tremor of something he hadn't felt in a decade. A terrifying, exhilarating mix of curiosity and hope. It was a flicker in the vast darkness, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he couldn't let it be extinguished by the morning light. He had to know who this voice belonged to. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like the first real one he'd taken in years, he pushed open the door to the midnight spoon. The little bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, incongruous sound that shattered Maya's reverie. Her eyes flew open, the fantasy stage dissolving back into the familiar, drab diner. She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her first thought was that she'd forgotten to lock the door, that this was some drunk wanderer, or worse, a robber. A tall man stood just inside the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the freshly mopped floor. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored wool coat that was soaked through, and his shoes, though wet, were clearly expensive. But it was his face that held her captive. He had eyes of a startling deep gray, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that was neither threatening nor leering, but something else entirely, something she couldn't name. It was a look of profound, stunned reverence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the small space. "We're closed." Maya clutched the damp rag to her chest like a shield. "The sign is on," she stated, her own voice coming out far shakier than she intended. "I'm just finishing up." He didn't seem to hear her. He took a slow step forward, his gaze sweeping around the empty diner, as if trying to understand how such a sound could have come from such a place. "The song you were singing," he said, his voice softer now. "What was it?" Maya blinked, thrown off balance. Of all the things she had expected, a question about her mindless humming was not one of them. "It's, just an old song. Gloomy Sunday." "I know the song," he replied, his eyes finding hers again. "But I've never heard it sung like that. Who taught you to sing it that way?" The question was so personal, so specific, that it disarmed her. "My grandmother," she found herself answering truthfully. "She loved jazz, the old stuff. Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan." He nodded slowly, a ghost of the smile touching his lips. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which remained shadowed with a deep, ancient sadness. She had excellent taste. He paused, and for a moment, the only sounds were the rain against the window and the buzz of the refrigerator. Maya felt a strange tension in the air, a sense of a pivotal moment happening without her permission. "My name is Julian Vance." The name meant nothing to her. She was expecting a John or a Mike. It sounded formal, old-fashioned. "Okay," she said, still wary. "Look, Mr. Vance, I really have to finish and get home. It's been a long shift." He reached inside his coat, and for a terrifying second, her mind flashed to every crime show she'd ever seen. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a slim, elegant wallet. From it, he extracted a business card. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the letters embossed in a simple, severe font. He held it out to her. Hesitantly, she took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cold from the rain. The card read, "Julian Vance, CEO Vance Music Group." Maya stared at the card. Vance Music Group. VMG. The legendary record label. The home of rock gods and pop queens. The label that had dominated the charts for 3 decades. It was a name as ubiquitous as Coca-Cola or Google. Her brain struggled to connect the mythical corporate entity with the drenched, haunted-looking man standing in front of her. This had to be a joke. A very, very weird prank. "Right," she said, a skeptical laugh escaping her. "And I'm the Queen of England." For the first time, the smile reached his eyes, and the effect was startling. It was like seeing the sun break through a storm cloud. "I assure you, I'm not that interesting. Your voice, however, is." He grew serious again. "I haven't heard a voice like yours in a very long time. Maybe ever." The sincerity in his tone was undeniable. It cut through her disbelief and struck a chord deep inside her, a chord that hadn't been played in years. The part of her that had once dared to dream. I just hum while I work. It's nothing. It's everything, he countered, his voice firm. I have a private recording studio. Not at the main VMG building. A more personal space. I'd like you to come and sing for me. Properly. With a microphone. No obligation. No promises. I just need to hear that voice again, without the sound of a refrigerator humming in the background. Maya's mind was reeling. A private studio. A recording contract. It was the plot of a bad movie, not her life. Her life was lukewarm coffee, aching feet, and the constant, low-grade anxiety of never having enough. People like him didn't just walk into diners and discover people like her. It didn't happen. I don't understand, she whispered, looking from the card to his face. You don't have to, he said gently. Just, will you think about it? The number on the card is my direct line. It won't go to a secretary. It will come to me. Call me tomorrow. Or don't. The choice is yours. He looked at her for a moment longer, his gray eyes seeming to see right through her defenses, to the hopeful girl she kept buried beneath layers of cynicism and disappointment. Then, with another small, sad smile, he turned and walked back out into the rain, the bell chiming his departure. Maya stood alone in the Bird Diner. The silence now feeling immense, deafening. The only evidence he had ever been there was the business card in her hand and the small puddle of rainwater evaporating on the floor. She looked at the card again, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. Julian Vance. She slowly walked over to the diner's grimy desktop computer, tucked away in a corner near the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she typed the name into the search bar. The screen filled with images. There he was, younger, smiling on red carpets with glamorous, famous people. There were articles from Forbes, Billboard, Rolling Stone, the Midas of music, the man with the golden ear. And then, the more recent articles, from the last 10 years. The reclusive mogul. The vanishing of Vance. They all told the same story, the tragic death of his star artist and partner, Cassandra Vale, and his subsequent withdrawal from the public eye. He hadn't personally signed a new artist in a decade. He was a ghost. A legend. Maya sank onto a stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The business card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He wasn't a prankster. He was real. And he had heard her. All because she sang like no one was listening. Even when someone was. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over her. The world had just tilted on its axis, and she had no idea which way was up. The subway ride home was a blur. Maya clutched the strap of her worn messenger bag. The precious business card tucked safely in her wallet, feeling its presence like a hot coal against her hip. The city lights smeared past the grimy window. A familiar sight that suddenly felt alien. It was as if she was seeing her own life from a distance, the drudgery and routine cast in a harsh new light by the impossible encounter. The other passengers, slumped in sleep or lost in sound, their phones seemed to belong to a world she had just been ejected from. Her apartment was a tiny fourth-floor walk-up in a pre-war building with plumbing that moaned and radiators that hissed like angry snakes. It was small and apparate, cluttered, but it was hers. Books were stacked in precarious towers, sheet music was piled on her small electric piano, and a framed photo of her grandmother, a vibrant woman with laughing eyes and a microphone in her hand, sat on her nightstand. Ilara had been a jazz singer in small, smoky clubs in the 70s, never famous, but always passionate. She was the source of all of Maya's musical DNA. Whoa. You've got the gift, baby girl, Ilara used to say, her voice raspy from a lifetime of cigarettes and song. Don't you ever let anyone, especially yourself, tell you it ain't worth sharing. But life had a way of eroding such grand pronouncements. Ilara had passed away 5 years ago, and with her, much of Maya's courage had gone too. There had been a few disastrous open mic nights in college, her voice trembling under the bored gaze of a handful of patrons. The sting of that indifference had been sharp, and she had retreated, packing the dream away like an old sweater. It was safer to sing for the empty booths at the Midnight Spoon than for a room full of living, breathing people who could judge her, dismiss her, She collapsed onto her bed, without changing out of her work clothes, the smell of grease and bleach clinging to her. She pulled out the card again, staring at Julian Vance's name. The man from the diner. His eyes. She couldn't forget his eyes. They hadn't looked at her like a waitress, an object, a service provider. They had looked at her like an artist. It was a gaze she had only ever seen in the mirror when she was a little girl. Practicing her grandmother's songs with a hairbrush for a microphone. Sleep was impossible. Her mind raced, a frantic tug-of-war between hope and fear. What if she called? What if he was serious? She imagined a gleaming studio, a grand piano, a microphone that could capture every nuance of her voice. But then, the fear would rush in, cold and paralyzing. What if she went and her voice cracked? What if, under pressure, the magic he thought he heard disappeared? What if the voice he heard in the rain was a fluke, a one-time thing born of exhaustion and solitude? He would dismiss her with a polite, pitying smile, and she would have to return to her life. But now the grayness of it would be unbearable, tainted by the glimpse of a vibrant, colorful alternative. It was better not to know, wasn't it? Better to protect a fragile dream from the harsh light of reality. By dawn, she had argued herself into a state of paralysis. The sun streamed through her window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She hadn't slept. She dragged herself to the coffee maker, her body aching with a fatigue that was more than physical. As the coffee brewed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo, the head cook at the diner. A burly, tattooed man with a surprisingly gentle soul. Leo, you left your lunchbox again. Want me to save the sad-looking apple? Maya smiled. Leo was her work family, the one person who knew about her singing, even if he only ever heard snippets of it. Maya, let the apple meet its fate. Rough night. Leo, you okay? Someone give you trouble? After I left? Maya, no. The opposite maybe. It's complicated. She stared at her phone. Then, at the business card sitting on her counter. She needed a dose of reality. She needed Leo's pragmatism. She typed out a longer message, explaining the impossible story of the man in the rain. The business card. The name, Julian Vance. His reply came almost instantly. Leo. Holy. S***T. Julian Vance? The Julian Vance? No way. Maya, that's insane. Is it a prank? Maya, that's what I thought. But I googled him. It's him, Leo. And he wants you to call him? To sing? Maya, this isn't a maybe. This is a lottery ticket falling out of the sky and landing in your lap. You have to call. Maya, I'm terrified, Leo. What if I'm not good enough? Leo, good enough? Kid, I hear you sing to the damn salt shakers every night. You're better than good enough. You're real. In a world of auto-tuned robots, you're real. Fear is the little voice that tells you to stay in your comfort zone. Tell it to shut up. Call him. Now. Leo's words were the push she needed. He was right. Fear was a cage she had built for herself. The worst that could happen was rejection. And she had survived that before. But the regret of not trying, of not answering this once-in-a-lifetime knock on the door, would be a far heavier burden to carry. Her heart pounding. She picked up her phone and dialed the number from the card. It rang twice, each ring echoing the frantic beat of her own pulse. She expected a long hold, a series of automated menus. Vance. The same low, gravelly voice from last night answered directly. No preamble, no greeting. Maya's throat went dry. Hello. Mr. Vance? This is Maya. From the diner. Last night. There was a pause on the other end, and for a horrible second, she thought he wouldn't remember. Maya. He said, and the way he said her name, with a soft recognition, made her knees feel weak. I was hoping you'd call. You were? Yes, he said simply. I don't make a habit of standing in the rain or accosting waitresses after midnight. Last night was an exception. I'm glad it wasn't a mistake. Are you free this afternoon? The question was so direct, so sudden. This afternoon? I guess so. I don't have to be at work until 5. Good. I'll send a car for you at 1 o'clock. Text me your address. It will take you to my studio. It's called the Sanctuary. A car. The Sanctuary. It all sounded so surreal. A car? You don't have to do that. I can take the subway. Maya, he said, and there was a note of gentle command in his voice. Let me do this. 1 o'clock. And with that, he hung up. Maya stared at her phone, her hand shaking. It was happening. She texted her address, her fingers feeling clumsy and foreign. She had less than 4 hours to prepare for a meeting that could potentially alter the entire course of her existence. What did one wear to meet a reclusive billionaire music mogul? What did one sing? Her mind was a blank slate of panic and adrenaline. She looked at her grandmother's photo. Ilara's smile seemed to encourage her. You've got the gift, baby girl. Taking a deep breath, Maya walked to her closet. At exactly 1 o'clock, a sleek, black town car, the kind she only ever saw in movies, pulled up in front of her rundown building. The driver, a polite man in a black suit, held the door for her. Sliding onto the plush leather seat felt like entering another dimension. The car was silent, gliding through the noisy city streets with an insulated grace she'd never experienced. For 20 minutes, she watched her world, the world of bodegas and laundromats, slip by. The car turned into a quiet, cobbled street in Greenwich Village, a neighborhood of historic brownstones and leafy trees. It stopped in front of an unassuming, ivy-covered building that looked more like an old church than a place of business. There was no sign, no indication of what lay within. The driver led her to a heavy oak door and pressed a discreet buzzer. The door was opened by Julian Vance himself. He was dressed simply, in dark jeans and a soft gray cashmere sweater. In the daylight, the sadness in his eyes was still present, but there was also a nervous energy about him, a flicker of anticipation. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a restless artist. Maya, I'm glad you came, he said, stepping aside to let her in. She stepped across the threshold, and her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't in a sterile, modern office. She was in a space that felt holy. The entrance hall opened up into a vast, 2-story main room. The walls were exposed brick, lined with shelves holding thousands of vinyl records. A spiral staircase led to a balcony that wrapped around the upper level. Sunlight streamed through a massive arched window at the far end of the room, illuminating a breathtaking collection of vintage instruments, a gleaming Fazioli grand piano, several vintage guitars resting in their stands like sleeping sentinels, and a set of time-worn Ludwig drums. The air smelled of old wood, lemon oil, and something else, something intangible, like history and creativity. This was the sanctuary. This is, she began, unable to find the words. My escape, Julian finished for her. And my workshop. This is where the real work has always been done, away from the glass towers and the boardrooms. Cassandra, she loved this place. He said the name with a quiet reverence that was achingly sad. Maya suddenly understood. This place wasn't just a studio, it was a memorial, a shrine. And he had invited her, a stranger, into it. The weight of that trust settled on her shoulders. Come, he said, leading her towards the center of the room. Don't be intimidated by all the ghosts. They're friendly. He gestured towards the grand piano. Do you play? A little, Maya admitted. My grandmother taught me the basics, but I'm better on the old upright in my apartment. Let's just start with your voice then, he said. He led her to a specific spot in the room where a single, vintage-looking microphone stood, a Neumann U47, a legend in the recording world. This was Cassandra's favorite microphone. It's very honest. It captures everything. Maya's stomach twisted into a knot. Singing into Cassandra Vale's microphone, in her sacred space, for the man who had loved her. The pressure was immense. She felt like an intruder, a fraud. Julian must have seen the panic in her eyes. His expression softened. Hey, he said, his voice gentle. Forget all of this. Forget me. Forget the room. Go back to last night. You were wiping down tables. You were alone. You were tired. And you were singing. Just for you. Can you find that place again? UI? She took a deep, shaky breath. her gaze falling on the piano, the guitars, the silent history of the room. She was an imposter. Her voice, the one he had heard, was a product of solitude and exhaustion, not a talent she could summon on command. I don't know if I can, she stammered, her hands clammy. It's different. You're watching. Julian didn't pressure her. He simply nodded and walked over to a small, professional-grade mixing board in the corner of the room, tended by a woman with short, silver hair and a serene expression. Clara, this is Maya. Maya, this is Clara. She's the only person I trust to touch these dials. She's been with me for 30 years. Clara gave Maya a warm, encouraging smile. Nice to meet you, dear. Don't mind him. He gets dramatic. Just pretend we're furniture. Julian picked up a guitar, a beautiful, aged Martin acoustic. He didn't look at Maya, instead focusing on the instrument as he sat on a stool. He began to play, not a song, just a series of soft, intricate chords, a gentle, meandering melody that filled the space without demanding attention. It was patient music, waiting music. He was giving her space. He was creating a sonic bubble for her to step into when she was ready. The gesture was so unexpectedly kind, so intuitive, that it chipped away at her wall of fear. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. She thought of the diner, the smell of bleach, the satisfying glide of the rag on the counter. She thought of her grandmother, of the way Ilara's voice could make a sad song feel like a warm hug. And slowly, tentatively, she began to hum. The same melody from the night before. It was quiet at first, a thread of sound in the vast room. Julian's guitar playing softened, shifting its key to match her own, weaving itself around her hum, supporting it, lifting it. He wasn't leading her, he was following. Finding courage in his accompaniment, she opened her mouth and let the words come. Some day is gloomy, my hours are slumberless. Her voice was trembling, but it was there. It was real. As she sang, she kept her eyes closed, shutting out the intimidating room, shutting out the legendary man listening, and focusing only on the story in the song. The story of loss, of longing, of enduring. By the time she reached the second verse, the tremor was gone, replaced by the smoky, soulful tone he had heard through the diner window. She wasn't performing anymore. She was confessing again. When the last note faded into the sunlit air, a profound silence descended upon the room. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy with unspoken emotion. Maya slowly opened her eyes. Clara was staring at the mixing board, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. Julian had stopped playing. He was looking at his hands, at the guitar in his lap, as if he didn't recognize it. Finally, he lifted his head, and his gray eyes met hers. They were no longer just sad. They were alight with a fire she hadn't seen before. A fire of creation, of purpose. 10 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been waiting 10 years to feel that again. He stood up and walked towards her, his expression one of absolute certainty. I don't just want to offer you a recording contract, Maya. I want to produce your album myself, here, in this room, just you and me. We're going to make something the world has forgotten how to hear. The offer hung in the air, vast and terrifying and beautiful. It wasn't just a business proposition. It was an invitation to step out of the shadows and into the light, guided by a man who had just found his own way out of the darkness. Maya looked from his face to her grandmother's imagined one, and for the first time since Ilara had passed, she didn't feel the sting of her absence. She felt the strength of her legacy. Okay, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it was the steadiest it had been all day. Yes, okay. The days that followed were a whirlwind of surrealism. Maya felt as though she were living a double life. By day, she was in the sanctuary, a hallowed space of music and history, working with a living legend. Julian was a revelation as a producer. He wasn't a tyrant demanding perfection. He was an archaeologist, carefully brushing away the dust and debris of her insecurity to reveal the authentic art beneath. He'd have her sing the same line a dozen times, not to get it technically perfect, but to find the version that held the most truth. "Don't sing it, Maya," he'd say from the control booth, his voice a calm presence in her headphones. "Tell me the story. What does that word taste like? What memory does it bring up?" He pushed her, but gently, like a steady hand at her back. He had her listen to obscure blues singers from the 1930s, to Brazilian folk artists, to avant-garde composers. He wasn't trying to change her. He was trying to broaden her vocabulary, to give her new colors with which to paint. And then, at 4:30 p.m., the spell would break. She'd take the subway back to her world, change into her uniform, and spend the next 8 hours at the Midnight Spoon. She'd refill coffee cups, take orders for greasy burgers, and mop the same floor. The contrast was jarring. The clatter of plates felt louder, the fluorescent lights harsher. Her regulars, old men who read the paper for hours over a single cup of coffee, had no idea that the woman serving them had just spent her afternoon deconstructing a chord progression with Julian Vance. Leo was her anchor to reality. "So, what did the ghost of music past have you do today?" he'd ask while flipping burgers on the grill. "He made me listen to a woman who sounded like she gargled with gravel and smoked a pack of unfiltered cigarettes for breakfast," Maya would say, laughing. "And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "You're changing, kid," Leo said one evening, wiping his hands on his apron. "You walk differently, like you're not apologizing for taking up space anymore." He was right. A quiet confidence was beginning to bloom within her. The imposter syndrome still lingered, a nagging whisper in the back of her mind. But Julian's unwavering belief in her was a powerful antidote. Their sessions in the sanctuary became a ritual. They'd start not with singing, but with talking. She told him about her grandmother, Ilara, playing him a crackling old recording she had of her singing in a club. He listened with an intense focus, nodding slowly. In return, he spoke of Cassandra, not with the crushing weight of grief, but with the warm glow of cherished memory. He showed Maya old video footage, not of her grand performances, but of her in this very studio, laughing, struggling with a lyric, her genius in its raw, unpolished state. He was sharing his ghost with her, not as a burden, but as a benediction. He wanted her to understand the legacy she was stepping into. One afternoon, they were working on a new song, a simple, heartbreaking ballad Maya had written years ago and never shown anyone. Julian was at the piano, working out a delicate arrangement. "The third line," he said, pausing. "The silence you left is a room of its own. It's good, but it's passive. The silence is something that's happening to you. What if you owned it? What if you were an active participant in it?" Maya thought for a moment, humming the melody. The line had always felt a little weak. Then, an idea sparked. "What about, I furnished the silence with pictures of you." Julian's hands froze over the piano keys. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wide with surprise and profound respect. "Yes," he breathed. "That's it. That's a world-class line, Maya." In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just his student or his discovery anymore. She was his collaborator. The validation was more powerful than any contract. But the idyllic bubble of the sanctuary couldn't last forever. The world outside was beginning to take notice. A tidbit had been leaked to a popular music blog, a rumor that the reclusive Julian Vance was finally working on a new project. Speculation was rampant. Who was this mystery artist? The first sign of trouble came in the form of Marcus Thorne, VMG's president of ABER. He showed up at the sanctuary unannounced, a sleek, smiling man in a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. His presence felt like a violation, a corporate stain on the sacred space. "Julian, so the rumors are true," Marcus said, his voice booming in the quiet room. He looked at Maya with a polite but dismissive glance, his eyes scanning her simple jeans and t-shirt as if they were a balance sheet he found wanting. "Keeping this one under wraps, are we? I'm Marcus Thorne. I know who you are," Maya said quietly. "We're not ready to talk about this yet, Marcus," Julian said, his tone cool and protective. He had positioned himself slightly in front of Maya. "Nonsense. We need to start building a narrative, Marcus boomed, ignoring Julian's clear discomfort. The story is fantastic. Reclusive genius finds raw, undiscovered talent in a greasy spoon. It's gold. We need to get her a stylist, a media coach. We can position her as the anti-pop star. We'll need a single ready for the fall quarter. Something with a bit more tempo, of course. Ballads don't move units like they used to. Maya felt herself shrinking. Stylist, media coach, tempo, units. He was talking about her music, as if she were a product, a commodity to be packaged and sold. The album will be ready when it's ready, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. And it will be the album we want to make, not the one your marketing department thinks will sell. Julian, be realistic, Marcus said, his smile tightening. The board is getting antsy. Your sabbatical has been costly. They're thrilled you're back in the game, but we need a win, a commercial win. We can't afford an indulgent passion project. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Passion project, indulgent. Marcus was framing Julian's return to his art as a risky self-indulgence. You will schedule a meeting with me before you make another move, Marcus said, his voice now a clear order. And bring the girl. I want to hear what 10 years of silence has bought us. He gave Maya another dismissive look and then strode out, his expensive shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. The silence he left behind was heavy and toxic. The creative energy in the room had curdled. Maya looked at Julian. The fire in his eyes had been dampened, replaced by the weary shadow she'd seen that first night. He was looking at the door through which Marcus had left, his jaw tight. The outside world had breached the walls of the sanctuary, and it had brought its ugliness with it. The ghost he was fighting wasn't just Cassandra's memory. It was the soulless machine he himself had built. And Maya was now caught in the middle of that war. The meeting with Marcus Thorne was scheduled for the following week at the VMG Tower, a monument of steel and glass in midtown Manhattan that seemed to scrape the sky. The days leading up to it were strained. The easy, creative flow in the sanctuary was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Julian was distracted, often lost in thought, the shadows under his eyes darker than before. He was less a collaborator and more a worried general planning for a battle he didn't want to fight. Maya, for her part, felt a cold dread pooling in her stomach. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Stylist. Media coach. Tempo. Units. He wanted to sand down her edges, polish her until she fit into a marketable box. The anti-pop star was still a pop star, just with a different label. She found herself retreating, her voice tight during their sessions, her lyrics feeling self-conscious. The fear she thought she had conquered was creeping back in. The night before the meeting, she was wiping down the last table at the diner, her movements robotic. The familiar routine, usually a comfort, felt like a cage. This was her reality. Maybe the dream of the sanctuary was just a brief, beautiful illusion. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she was just an indulgent passion project, a fantasy Julian had cooked up to deal with his own demons. Leo found her staring blankly at a salt shaker. You're a million miles away, he said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. Big meeting tomorrow, huh? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Listen to me, he said, leaning on the counter. That guy in the fancy suit, he sells music. You are music. There's a difference. He sees a product, but Julian, he saw you. In the dark, in the rain. Don't you forget what he heard. Don't let them make you forget. His simple wisdom cut through her anxiety. He was right. Marcus hadn't heard her sing her heart out to an empty room. He hadn't seen the truth of it. Only Julian had. She had to hold on to that. The next day, she met Julian in the lobby of the VMG Tower. He was wearing a tailored suit, a piece of armor that looked unnatural on him after seeing him in soft sweaters and worn jeans. He looked like the CEO from the old press clippings, a man she didn't know. You ready? He asked, his voice strained. No, she said honestly, which made him smile, a flicker of the real Julian. Me neither, he confessed. Let's get this over with. Marcus Thorne's office was on the top floor, a cavernous space with a panoramic view of the city. It felt less like an office and more like a conqueror's perch. Marcus was there, along with two other executives, a man and a woman who looked like they were carved from the same block of expensive, ambitious marble. "Julian, Maya, glad you could make it," Marcus said, gesturing for them to sit in chairs that were stylish but deeply uncomfortable. "Let's get right to it. We've had our top people listen to the demos you sent over." He slid a glossy folder across the vast mahogany desk. "The raw material is interesting. Very raw. Very authentic. The diner waitress narrative is strong. But it's not commercial. Not yet." He opened the folder. Inside were marketing mock-ups. There was a photo of Maya, clearly a paparazzi shot taken outside her apartment, looking tired and stressed. Beside it were stylized, airbrushed versions of what she could look like. Her hair was different. Her clothes were designer edgy. Her face was contoured into an expression of sultry boredom. Maya felt a wave of nausea. "Where did you get that picture of me?" Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "We have people. The point is, this is the before, and this," he tapped the airbrushed photo, "is the after. This is the artist we can sell," he went on, his voice a smooth, confident drone. He spoke of focus groups, of demographic appeal, of cross-platform brand synergy. He outlined a plan that involved co-writers, hit-making producers who could punch up her melodies, and a strategic leak of a more upbeat track to test the market. "The song Still Life," Marcus continued, referring to the ballad she and Julian had worked on, the one with the lyric she was so proud of. "The melody is haunting, but the lyrics are a downer. We've had one of our top writers, the guy who wrote Serafina's last 3 number ones, do a little polish." He slid a sheet of paper towards her. Maya picked it up. Her line, "I furnished the silence with pictures of you," had been replaced with, "Since you've been gone, I party for 2. It was so vapid, so utterly soulless, that she almost laughed. It was a desecration. She looked up from the paper, her eyes burning. She looked at Marcus, at the other executives with their blank, placid faces. Then she looked at Julian. He was staring at the lyric sheet, his face pale, his expression unreadable. He was silent. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't defending her. He had retreated back into his fortress of silence. In that moment, her fear didn't just recede, it was burned away by a sudden, clarifying rage. A rage on behalf of herself, on behalf of her grandmother, on behalf of the music itself, and on behalf of the man sitting next to her, who had forgotten how to fight for the very thing he claimed to believe in. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the corporate jargon like a razor. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry? I said no," Maya repeated, her voice gaining strength. She pushed the lyric sheet back, across the desk. "You can't have it. You can't have that song. And you can't have me." She stood up, her entire body trembling with adrenaline. "You talk about raw and authentic, as if they're marketing buzzwords you can slap on a product. You don't have a clue what they mean. Authenticity is singing when you're exhausted and alone because it's the only thing that keeps you sane. It's writing a line of a song that feels like you've torn it out of your own chest." She turned her gaze to Julian, and her voice softened, filled not with anger, but with a profound, pleading disappointment. "And you heard that. You stood in the rain, and you heard it. You told me it was everything. You told me you'd been waiting 10 years to hear it. Was that a lie? Or is this," she gestured around the opulent office, "this tomb, what you've been waiting for? Did you bring me here to offer me up as a sacrifice to them, so they'd leave you alone for another decade?" Julian flinched, as if she had physically struck him. Her words hit their mark, shattering his silent facade. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a storm of conflict, shame, and a dawning horror at his own inaction. He looked at Marcus's smug face, at the glossy, soulless marketing plan, at the corrupted lyrics of her song. He saw the trap he had almost walked into, the trap he had built for himself years ago. He was about to let the machine he created devour the very thing that had promised to save him. "From it." "Maya's right," Julian said, his voice a low growl. He stood up, slowly, deliberately. The armor of the suit fell away, and he was the guardian of the sanctuary once more. "This meeting is over." "Julian, don't be ridiculous," Marcus scoffed. "The board." "To hell with the board," Julian snapped, his voice ringing with a power Marcus hadn't heard in years. "Vance Music Group has my name on it, but for the last decade, it's been run by accountants and marketers. That ends today." He picked up the glossy folder with the marketing plan and, with a calm, deliberate motion, ripped it in half. "You will not touch her music. You will not package her. You will not polish her. She is the first true artist this label has had in 10 years, and we are going to do this my way." He looked at Marcus, his gray eyes like chips of granite. "I'm invoking Clause 14B of my founding contract. Full creative and financial control over any project I personally produce. I'm funding this album myself, out of my own pocket. Your marketing budget will be zero. Your input will be zero. We will release it when it is perfect, and not a moment sooner. Are we clear?" The executives stared, mouths agape. Marcus Thorne's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. He had poked a sleeping dragon, and it had just woken up. Julian didn't wait for an answer. He put a hand on Maya's cron. "Back. Let's go home," he said. And the way he said home, he meant the sanctuary. He guided her out of the office, leaving the stunned executives in their glass tower. As they waited for the elevator, Maya was still trembling, but this time, it was with triumph. She had found her voice, in more ways than one. And in doing so, she had helped Julian Vance find his again. The silence wasn't a room to be furnished anymore. It was a wall to be shattered. And together, they had just thrown the first stone.